Hello, I'm Craig DeRoche, CEO of Family Policy Alliance. Look, folks, the inauguration has been the news of our time lately, and President Donald Trump's unique return to office after a 4-year gap offers a time to reflect on some of the many presidential traditions in our nation that are of some importance. Today, just to bring you exactly that, I'm joined by a presidential historian who will help us understand the history and relevance of the inauguration. Jane Hampton Cook is an award winning author of over a dozen books, actually 18 books, and they're wonderful books. And we're going to have a link up here for you to check those out. She's a national media commentator. She's on Fox News and CNBC and a lot of other Sky TV internationally, and is a former White House communication staffer. So she knows what this is from the inside out. She joins us today from her home just outside of Washington. Jane, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, well, it is a real privilege, and there's a lot of excitement. There's always excitement in our country. I think no matter who gets elected president, but for our audience, a very Christian audience that was worried that our country, some of the things are slipping away from us. They're especially celebratory. But we're not talking about issues today. We're talking about the inauguration itself, and I'm going to start with that. You've worked in the White House, you've written books about presidents and everything else, but the inauguration itself, what is that actually about? Why does our country actually have an inauguration?
Well, primarily, an inauguration is a peaceful transfer of power. We show the world that we are not built on royalty, but we are built on representation, that we are a republic. And so that transfer of power is what is the message that goes out to the world. And then, usually what you see is people are looking to God. God is very much a focus and has been at inaugurations, especially in the president's addresses. And then we also see it's unity because when the president takes his oath on the Bible and raises his hand, he's doing it in front of the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, and enjoying him are members of both the House and the Senate. So it's unity. It's a picture of unity in our three branches of government. And then we also look to the past. Sometimes presidents go back and they talk a little bit about George Washington or Abraham Lincoln or others, and then they speak with broad strokes about the future. It's not like the State of the Union where it's a big policy drill down. It's broad strokes. It's big picture, and it's this privilege that we get to have this every 4 years.
So inaugurations began with our first president, President George Washington, and you had the privilege of working much later for a president, but he's the one that kind of set this forward. And you actually wrote a book. I'll highlight some of this as you and I are talking, but just a fabulous devotional book called Stories of Faith and Courage from the Revolutionary War. And that really was the Revolutionary War up until the inauguration of our first president who did this twice. What role did the Bible and faith play in George Washington's first inauguration?
Well, it played a role in several ways. First, he took the oath of office on a King James version of the Bible. It was opened to chapters 49 and 50 in Genesis, which was the death of Jacob and a listing of the tribes of Israel. So he put his left hand on that open Bible. He took the presidential oath, and then he kissed the Bible when he was finished. And then the MC called out, the president of the United States, and the crowd down below. This was in New York City at Federal Hall. This is Broad Street. And the crowd was really excited. And then he went back into the hall and gave his inaugural address to the members of Congress. And then it was printed in papers. And in his inaugural address, he says that this is my first act as president is to offer supplications to the Almighty Being who rules over the universe and presides in the councils of nations. And I looked to see, when did the King James Version of the Bible use the term Almighty? And I found a verse that very much mirrors the words that George Washington used, because God said to Jacob, "I am God Almighty, and that a nation and a company of nations will come after you." And so Washington, it feels like to me that he lifted that verse and adapted it into his inaugural address to say, hey, we are now a part of the Almighty's company of nations that he promised so long ago. And that gave me chills when I really saw that there was this parallel between the two, what he said and what the Bible had to say. And then he used terms like great author, the invisible hand. And what I've learned about George Washington is that he used more formal language than we do. You know, his words seemed kind of formal and maybe even stiff, but he was very much a stickler for manners, and he had a favorite etiquette book called The 110 Rules of Civility. And in that, rule number 108 is that when you speak of God or his attributes, let it be with seriousness, with reverence. And George Washington appears to me to have taken that to heart because he uses very respectful language when referring to God. And so those are some things. And then also, he talks about providential acts and providential agency. And that's a third way that the Bible plays a role in the first inauguration of George Washington.
Well, this is why I wanted to have you on this show. This is why you're such an important author, and I encourage everybody. We have the link. We're with Jane Hampton Cook, and she's talking about the inauguration of our first president, which set a precedent in the world history that a peaceful transfer of power was not common, was not something that was done. And rather than just make it a ceremony, our first president, George Washington, introduced providence and the reverence for the fulfillment of what God had promised us as human beings of being able to do. So, Jane, I've got a tricky question for you for my next question, which is we're going into an inauguration now again, and people talk everything from pop culture, who's singing the songs, to sometimes it's endearing. You know, we saw Bernie Sanders' wife knitted him mittens at the last one. But really, what's at stake here is the idea that God, the Almighty, as you said, Providence has a role in America and our founding and today, maybe. And that's my question for you. Do you think Providence still is looked at in the inauguration? Do you think that that's still being taken seriously with our traditions? And do you think that the public and our rising generation is aware that it's not just about who sings the songs, that this is we're talking about Providence and our unique place in the world. Do you expect that?
You know, I do expect that the president-elect will refer to God and will mention, um, guidance, looking to God for guidance. That's typically what you do see from the presidents in their, inaugural addresses. The word providence in the 1770s meant God's presence. It meant the walking of God among his people. That's how John Witherspoon, a Presbyterian minister, defined it in 1776. And then I discovered that George Washington used the term providence, the name Providence, 563 times in his writings. And so it was an important word to him, and he would describe how the all-powerful Providence saved him miraculously on a battlefield when he was 23 because he had 4 bullets through his coat and 2 horses shot under him. And you see throughout Washington's life that he really believes that every good public and private act comes from providence. And we don't use that term, this that our culture, I think, tends to look at the word providence and think good luck, and that's not what it really means. And I do think that there is an effort to look to God and to be humble. It could probably be a lot stronger in our culture than it is, but it's not absent. It's there. And you definitely, you know, I the numerous inaugural addresses, you do see that there is a humility and an acknowledgement of God. And I think for George Washington too, he was nervous to become president. He was not a civilian leader. He was a general. And he knew that the people's expectations of him were quite high. And I think the reason that he talked about the providential acts in his inaugural address is that he knew that he couldn't do this alone. And I think that's, if I've, in thinking about this upcoming inauguration, that's what I kind of reminded myself is that, you know, as powerful as the president of the United States is, both in our country and then across the globe, as powerful as that position is, it's God that oversees the president and the councils, and that we are to look to God. That's part of it. And, maybe we have a remnant right now, and maybe it's not dominant in the culture, but we've seen some things, in 2024, some miraculous things, that, we saw an assassination attempt on President Trump, and he believes that God saved him for a purpose. And so it's up to him to show us how that purpose is to move forward, under Almighty God.
Absolutely, and a case could be made that, that bullet hit right where God wanted it to hit, to get the attention and but that's right between our former and our returning president and, the Almighty and that presence of God we're talking about. So, I'm a consumer of these. I've been privileged to, be invited to them. I'm gonna be around the ceremonies, this week, but I don't understand. I'll confess, I don't understand the traditions. As I said, I talked about, some of the singers of songs and some of the other things, but, help our audience understand where these traditions come from and what they should expect, in this inauguration of, President, Donald Trump.
There are a lot of traditions that have emerged over the years. George Washington rode in a procession to Federal Hall with 500 military escorts. So that was a very large parade, if you will, from that time period. And we today we usually do the parade after the ceremony. The president and his wife will get into a car, they will drive into the parade, and then they'll walk for a bit. They'll get out and walk, and that was started by Jimmy Carter because he wanted to show that he was one of the American people, that he was just an average guy who had this job, and he was doing it, out of humility for the American people. So we've seen traditions like that come out, over the years, and then even earlier, Helen Taft, William Howard Taft's wife, started the tradition of riding with her husband in the parade, and then we'll see the entertainment in concerts before the inauguration and the days before it, and then we'll have balls the night of, and so there's a lot of pomp and circumstance, and there is a lot of entertainment value to it, but it again is this large picture of we have transferred power from one president to the next, and we are seeking to launch on the right footing. And I think that one of the things that, Washington was mindful of was choosing wise leaders, that he himself was not trying to initiate a policy agenda. He actually wanted the Congress to do that, and he wouldn't base it on what he wanted policy-wise. He was just going to make his decision to veto or approve a bill based on whether he thought it was constitutional. And we've drifted a long way from that mentality, and the presidency is so powerful today that it is something where we need to look for wisdom and wise leaders to lead these different divisions of the administration. And I think character goes a long way to helping, make sure that there is ethical leadership. And George Washington described it as private morality in his inaugural address. The happiness of the nation would be dependent upon, private morality, and that goes to this idea of wisdom.
Yeah, I'm in recovery for addiction, and I talk about that a lot where I say you can't give away something you don't have. We have to work on our own program, so to speak, with the Lord, and that's corporately reflected as we go out from that. You wrote a book, I'm with, Jane Hampton Cook, author of 18 wonderful books. You'll see the link to janecook.com so you can, find those. They're also, for sale at all of the places that you go to buy books, Christian bookstore. She's a Christian leader. She's a presidential historian. She's worked in the White House communications office, so she knows this stuff firsthand. She wrote a book about, just to your point, Jane, that you just made, you wrote a book about, John Quincy Adams, I believe, correct?
I did. Yeah.
And John Quincy Adams was one of the presidents that, going from that initial start, and he saw his father serve as our second president, who said, "You know what? Maybe I can do something about slavery, something that I consider to be an evil." So he actually started injecting his, his religious views and where he thought that Providence, where God wanted him to be in setting policy. And some of that was talked about his inauguration and later in his life and his advocacy at the Supreme Court and the rest of it. You can read more about that with Jane Hampton Cook with her book. But we have gone into a place where the inauguration sets the stage for those of us that are of faith at home to know what to expect. And with the previous administration, they made it very clear they were going to disregard some of our values on the creation aspects of our reverence for life of people before they're born, and we were preparing to endure that from the inauguration forward. What other applications do we see in an inauguration, and what could we expect this time as we prepare to hear what we might expect as Christians? That's for our audience here as Christians through the inaugural weekend and traditions that we're going to witness.
Well, you certainly hit upon several things there. John Quincy Adams did follow in his father's footsteps and became president. And my book about him is called American Phoenix, and we're working on turning John Quincy and his wife Louisa's story into a TV series. And so I'm working on that because he was such an instrumental president in terms of his thinking and that his witnessing of his father's life and administration. And, he set the Monroe Doctrine, which was a a policy that governed us in our foreign affairs for over 100 years that some people kinda wanna return to, more of that mentality. But, you know, it strikes me that we we have these policies that did target Christians, that did go against a lot of Christian values in this last administration, and that alone can be overturned and changed. I mean, I know Catholics were targeted by the FBI for being more traditional Catholic and preferring Latin Mass. And so some of those kinds of policies, where there is an expectation from believers that those things will turn around and that we will have an administration that understands the importance of faith and that values it instead of disregards it or tries to set it aside. Um, and it's tricky because we do have a country that's got so many different ethnicities and we have people with different denominations and different religious beliefs. What I noticed about the founding of our nation, though, is that we hear the word diversity today, and when I looked back, I asked myself, well, what were the biggest differences among the founders? And John Adams looked at the variety of religions, and what he meant was the variety of denominations divided them. It was so strong in the Continental Congress that they couldn't agree on which minister to invite to come pray over them. And there was a fight over it because some were Presbyterian, some were Church of England, some were Baptist. And Adams wrote that we had to get over this and that we had to come together. And so that's what the American people have to do as well. Um, and that's one of the symbols I think of the inauguration is that it is unity and bringing, just as President Trump has built a broad coalition, there's also unity in looking that we are a nation under God and that it's okay to say that and that we should say that and we should be proud of that. And, I think I'm personally looking forward to our 250th birthday in 2026, and I think it will give us an opportunity to look at those values as Americans and where we started and where we are now. And I think the inauguration is a launching point for um, pride in America and uh, hope in our future that comes from faith in God and being united as an American people under God.
Well, one of my jokes that I've been telling, and it might not be funny, my mother, who's still living, she even laughed at it, is, Joe Biden, our 46th president of the United States, has served for more than 50 years since, he was elected to Congress, which means that if he told George Washington and John Adams, and he started in the Senate, "Hey, I'm only gonna work 1 day a week," he still would be there, 250 years later. So America is preparing to turn the page. The baby boomer generation with the election of Donald Trump will have run our country since 1992, a remarkable stretch, 36 years of time, and collectively approximately 80 years of experience, whether it be Chuck Schumer or Nancy Pelosi
Yeah.
or Mitch McConnell, Donald Trump and Joe Biden. And so there's a lot of history, there's a lot at stake. And that's why we want to encourage our audience to pay close attention to this inauguration. There's a lot of themes and there's a lot of change that's going on because as this generation is maybe electing their last president, we don't know what God's plans are, and we don't make plans for God. They're going to be, and the theme seems to be a return to the things that have made America great. And really, I can't think of anything more important than what make America great was our reliance on Providence. We have Jane Hampton Cook with us here. And Jane, I'm going to allow you to tell us. You told us about, I mentioned two of your books. You mentioned the John Quincy Adams one being turned into a TV project, but let our audience know what you're up to right now. I know there's going to be a bunch of people that are going to be looking you up and trying to find you. So tell us about where you want them to find you in your current projects that you think would be a great way to introduce people to what you're doing and how the Lord is using you today.
Well, you can reach me at janecook.com, and, I also have my books are also on Amazon. One of the things I've done is I've created a children's book series called Revolutionary Readers for America's 250th, and I have a set of books out about the flag, and there's the numbers of the books, 1 is for 1st grade, a 2 is for 2nd grade, and I looked at the flag, I talked about I did a book on the America the Beautiful, My Country 'Tis of Thee, and all of these are designed to help teach children about the very basics of patriotism and love of country and stories, and a variety of children are depicted in each of the books. And I'm working on another set of books in to continue the series there. I'm also working on I have a book that's finished, but we're working on getting it to the public by Thanksgiving because it's called A Great and Grateful Nation, and I look at the theme of giving thanks, and I really don't think we could have become a great country if we had not been grateful along the way, because I realized over and over again, the American people would set aside a day for giving thanks. It might be feasting like Thanksgiving, and then sometimes it was about fasting and praying, and that I wanna highlight that and help people see that that was really the pattern, and I think a lot of the answers to the grievance culture that we have right now, the answer to that is gratitude and finding gratitude in the good things in our nation's history. And there's also a movie coming out called The American Miracle. It'll come out this summer, so keep an eye out for it. And it looks at the hand of Providence. It's a mixture of reenactments, near a narrator, and then interviews with scholars. And I'm one of the scholars in this film. Tim Mahoney is the director. It's put out by Heroic Pictures and Thinking Man Films, and so we're really excited about it, and, it should make a big splash this summer because I think it'll be one of those films that'll really help people see the story of our founding in a fresh new way, and so, those are some of the projects. There's kind of a lot going on, but, again, I'm excited about America's 250th, and I just wanna help people reconnect to America's story, especially our founding era.
Well, I wanna tell you how excited I am to hear about that. Children's books for each grade. People of a certain age, I won't ask you about your age, but I'll confess that I was 6 years old in 1976, and, I remember the patriotism, I remember the flags. It's some of my earliest memories was, that was a difficult time for America. That was a difficult time for my parents, so the housing and being able to afford gas, I remember those conversations and things. And but the country was coming together, and it was an extraordinary time, and, your books are gonna help introduce the next generation of children like I was introduced to that patriotism and tell this story. So we're gonna have links up there. We wanna encourage our audience to check that out, and we also want them it sounds like my kind of, movie, the American was it The American Miracle?
Yes, The American Miracle.
The
The
American Miracle.
American Miracle, yeah, theamericanmiracle.com. is a way you can find out.
AmericanMiracle.com, and we're gonna have you back on if that's okay.
That would be great.
Talk about these things as we go forward, and maybe introduce our homeschooling audience and some of the others too to these wonderful books for their children that they can be using as they educate our kids about our history. Thank you so much, Jane Hampton Cook, and for being with us today and giving us some of that history. And for those of you at home, it's a blessing to always share with you. And you are joining us in droves right now. Droves at familypolicyalliance.com. We want to encourage you to keep coming in. You're recognizing that what will fix America is what made America great in the first place, which is putting God first and government second. And that is why so many of you are joining us in Christians Engage to make sure that we're eradicating that 40% of Americans, Christians, that do not participate in elections. That has convicted so many of us. The bags of gold, the talent that God gave us. We are Caesar. We own the country. We own our school district. We own our city. And we need to learn how to participate and vote 4 times every 1 year instead of 1 time every 4 years. And that is going on. So as you hear my voice and you hear Jane's voice, know that it falls on you to keep this great experiment and going of the American idea by participating in elections, and come to our website. If you haven't yet, take the pledge at Christians Engage. Join over 1 million Christians that have done that on our way to 10 million and impacting every election from the president of the United States down to the width of the sidewalks where you live. That is what your role is as the owner of this great country. Jane, thank you for being with us, and we'll talk again soon.
Thank you so much.